also want to make sure that we do things with these legislations that don't have the ill effects, that don't have the bad system that we have. We need to improve what we have, not continue what it is that's not working.
You want to invest in roads and bridges? Fix the criminal justice system. You want to invest in education? Fix the criminal justice system. You want to see a decrease in our social services? Fix the criminal justice system.
Last week, the Trump administration held an event promoting the hiring of prisoners who will be released early thanks to a program called the First Step Act. Meanwhile, in Pennsylvania, a bipartisan effort is underway to overhaul the state's probation and parole policies. Rapper Meek Mill, a Philadelphia native, has championed the effort. He was released from jail in 2018 after receiving a 2 to 4 year prison sentence for violations of a decade-old gun and drug possession case.
So under the Smart Probation and Parole Act, those who violate probation for either nonviolent or for technical reasons would not have to go back to prison. State Representatives Jordan Harris and Cheryl Delosier, Representative, introduced the bill in the Pennsylvania House. They join us now via Skype to discuss that legislation. Harris is the Democratic whip and represents District 186, and Delosier is the Republican representative in District 88. Welcome to both of you. Thanks so much for being with us.
Thanks for the invite.
Thanks for having us.
So, Representative Delosier, if you could just lay out what exactly this bill would do.
Well, as we've been working together for a lot of different issues, and Pennsylvania was the first to have a clean slate law go into effect, and we're going to be celebrating that at the end of this month as well to make it automatic here in Pennsylvania. So this bill is just one more step, and we have a couple of things that we're working on. But the bottom line is the fact that we have folks that are coming out of prison that have served their time, and we want to be able to say we want them to be good community residents. We want them find a job. We want them to be home with their families. And some of the rules that we've put into place, and honestly, the one shot and you're back is a bad idea. Because if we're going to say to somebody that you're late to an appointment, you have to go back to prison, that doesn't make common sense. So if you or I were late to a meeting, granted we don't have a prison record, but the bottom line is the fact that sometimes we want them to work, but sometimes if they can't get away from their job to meet with their probation officer, that causes them to violate, and then they're back in the system. And we don't want them back in the system.
So specifically, I'd like to talk about this sentencing someone to consecutive prison sentences and extending probation or parole over fines and fees for nonviolent offenses. Can you just explain why it's so difficult for a recently released recently released ex-prisoner to abide by all of these strenuous rules and regulations, and it would make it much easier for them to go back to prison?
So one of the things that I always say is that probation and parole is like the quicksand of the criminal justice system. The moment you get in, it's hard to get out, and the harder you try to get out, it continues to pull you back in. And here's what I mean by that. The way our laws are set up now, if you don't have a job, you could violate, that could be a violation of your probation or parole and send you back to jail. If you haven't paid your fines and court costs, that could send you back to jail. And none of those things make any sense with regards to sending people back. But here's the other problem. Once you get any type of violation, a judge can actually extend the time that you've been on probation or parole, which could actually set up a perpetual state of being on probation and parole for an indefinite amount of time. So, we want to just set parameters for what probation and parole should look like in Pennsylvania, as well as with the violation piece. And I think this is a big part. We're not sending people back for technical violations. We're giving them a court date and then letting a judge decide if that violation is something that should go back. Now, let's be clear. This is not new crimes. Person commits a new crime, that's different. We're talking about the whole technical violation.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen this happen so many times, Representative Delosier, where, I mean, it is almost impossible, right, to meet all the requirements. I mean, life happens. Like you said, you're late for one appointment, and they can send you back. You get a job, and you can't make the appointment, they can send you back. You don't have a job, and you can't pay the fees, and they can send you back. So lay out for us, though, the process if you do have a nonviolent or a technical violation of your terms here. What does happen? You go to a judge and then a judge decides, or is there some automatic penalty?
Well, as Jordan just mentioned, the ability for us to say that it's not an automatic process, because in the past, as soon as you were violated, you were back into prison. And that costs money. And it's not good for the person. It's not good for our communities. It's not good for the families. So there's a lot of bad impacts that have by making it an automatic. And as was just laid out, in the sense that we're not saying there's not consequences to doing something wrong. There are rules. And when someone comes out of prison, they're being overseen by our system for a reason, because they need to assimilate back into our communities. But we have put up so many barriers that it is so difficult. It's this vicious circle where simply by trying to do what's right and find that job, and maybe they had an interview, for a job when they were supposed to be meeting with their probation or parole officer. So we need to make sure that we can say to someone, you can work with your parole officer. You can make sure that, hey, I'm going for a job interview. I can't make that meeting. Can we reschedule? The flexibility does need to be there. The ramifications do need to be there as well. If someone does ignore the fact that they have to come in and talk to their probation officer, ignore the fact that they have to get a job, ignore the fact that they might have to take classes or do something that is part of why they were let out. So there are rules to go, but the bottom line is the fact that we shouldn't be making these hard, fast tunnels for people, because they're going to hit the wall and they're going to have a problem, and we're just going to be paying that cost when they go back in.
Think about it this way. In 2018, May of 2018, almost half of the people in Philadelphia's jail were there on detainers for probation and parole violations.
Wow.
Almost half.
Wow.
It's just ridiculous. So, I mean, what we're trying to do is turn it the other way. If there's a violation, again, not a new crime. A new crime is different. But if there's a violation, before we send you back, you go and see a judge. And here's why it's important. People have been put in jail for violations, right? And it could take them a month, 2, 3, 6 months until they get to their probation violation hearing. By that time, they've lost their job, they've lost their home, they're in a deeper hole, and then they can get in front of a judge, and a judge can just let them out. Well, the damage is already done. The system should be about how do we restore people, how we get them back into our society, not how we hinder them.
This is a question for both of you. Do you think that this type of bipartisan cooperation on criminal justice reform would be possible without the broader national movement? We have Meek Mill involved, Van Jones, President Trump obviously bringing Kim Kardashian to the White House to support legislation like this. Do you see yourselves both as a broader national effort to bring a bipartisan discussion on criminal justice reform?
Well, the one thing that I'll say is that in Pennsylvania, when we started with the clean slate, anytime you can have somebody that has attention and can grab attention nationally, absolutely, for any issue, that's important. But I think that in Pennsylvania, I joke about with the clean slate, now about 4 years ago, there were 2 central Pennsylvania Republicans and 2 Philadelphia Democrats that came together on this issue. And this was before we had many of the big names out there talking about criminal justice. But the one thing that worked for us is the sense that while our voting records may not have looked anything alike on any other issue, we were able to come together on criminal justice reform. And the bottom line is it's common sense changes, whether it's the clean slate law that we had worked on and had signed into law, whether it's probation and parole reforms, whether it's licensure reforms that we're also working on, right, whether it's training folks within the prisons to be ready to come out and get a job in our communities. There's a lot of common sense changes, and I think that resonates Republican, Democrat, urban, suburban, whatever you come from in Pennsylvania or nationally. I think that resonates.
Yeah, I mean, we were doing a lot of this work before a lot of the national stuff. The good thing that I've said, and I think we're fortunate to have so much happening on a national level, because now more people are paying attention to it. Now more people are talking about it. What happened to Meek and others like him, and I say others like him because we have to understand, what happened to Meek is not unique. His situation is not unique. And if you talk to anybody who has a relative in the system, they will tell you that set of circumstances isn't unique. The difference is because he's Meek Mill, because he's a famous entertainer, more people have paid attention. I'm just grateful that folks like Meek have turned this opportunity, turn this setback into an opportunity to galvanize support around the work that, legislators like myself and Cheryl and others across the nation are doing in state legislatures across the country to really try to address these issues.
Representative Harris, why do you think the moment is now for criminal justice reform? I mean, why has public opinion changed? Why do we have more Republicans, frankly, interested in moving forward on criminal justice reform? What do you think has changed that has made this moment possible?
Well, I mean, honestly, the truth for me is the time to fix the criminal justice system was 10, 15, 20 years ago before all of the harm. But let's be clear, this is not time to get the Republicans on board. The crime bill and all of the other bills that followed from a national level to the state legislatures across this country were a reaction, a knee-jerk reaction by Democrats and Republicans alike. The truth is that I think most people are now seeing that they were wrong. They were just wrong. The way that things were addressed were wrong, and now folks are seeing the damage that has been done. I mean, our criminal justice system is supposed to be about rehabilitation, but the sad fact is for many years it's been about retaliation. That's it. It's not been about helping people. It's been about punishing them. And the greater thing is it's been about punishing people that we don't like. It's just been that simple. You like a person, you get to go home. I don't like you, we're going to lock you up and throw you in jail. It doesn't work. It hasn't worked. But more importantly, and I think this is where Democrats and Republicans come together and agree, it's cost us way too much money. And not just the Department of Corrections, but all of the other things that come around it. But the biggest thing that has cost us is the human capital, the ideas that many who have been incarcerated have, the abilities that they have, what they could be providing to our society. We're losing all of that, and that's why we have to fix the system.
And the one thing that I'll add is the fact of, people that have made a mistake. And that's a lot of what we're talking about. People make mistakes. We're not talking about people that are in for 20, 30, 40 years. We're talking about people that have gone in and served a shorter time and now need to come back into our communities. We're talking about balancing safety. We're talking about balancing the rights of the victims of those crimes. We're talking about balancing the person that has served their time. They've done what the judicial system has asked of them. And now we need them to be part of our community. As Jordan mentioned, we do not want them back in prison. We want them out in the community, earning money, paying taxes, being a good father or mother to their children. That's what we want, and that's better for Pennsylvania as a whole and our country as a whole when other states do it.
Final question for you in just a few seconds left here. Tell us about Meek Mill's direct involvement in crafting this legislation.
So what happens is we have a whole army of folks that do this. I mean, we get to put our names on it and take the credit, but the truth of the matter is there's a lot of hard work done by our staffers. And the Reform Alliance, which is Meek, Van, Mike Rubin, Jay-Z, and all those folks, they actually have a team of folks, and they help with drafting. And I'm sure, from my conversations, Meek is at the table giving ideas. But let's be clear, not just Meek. There are other folks who are formerly incarcerated and convicted persons who are at the table and sharing their experiences. And that sharing of experiences helps us in how we do things. So from the Reform Alliance to the Justice Action Network to Families Against Mandatory Minimums to Americans for Prosperity, there's a wide range, cross-section of groups who have input at the table when we're coming up with this legislation. And we're grateful to have them all. We're grateful to have their support and kind of that extra nudge. I mean, listen, we're on the Hill TV right now because of the national attention around it. We just hope that people continue to have the spotlight on these issues as we continue to try to get them fixed.
Great.
This is very encouraging. Thank you both so much.
Sure.
Next up on Rising, if you really want to understand America, go to a McDonald's, or at least that is author Chris Arnon's philosophy. He's going to discuss why. We dive into what lies ahead in healthcare in our new series, The Rising Future of Medicare. Our first interview talks about the current state of the insurance markets. All of this when Rising continues.